When we think about the American Revolution, certain images instantly come to mind. Patrick Henry shouting, "Give me liberty or give me death," George Washington heroically crossing the Delaware, and the Boston Tea Party as the dramatic beginning of the end for the British Empire in the New World. But history doesn't always fit neatly into patriotic slogans and classroom posters. In fact, many of the things we think we know about the Revolution are either oversimplified, exaggerated, or just plain wrong. Let's start with one of the biggest myths, that all American colonists supported the Revolution. In reality, historians estimate that only about a third of the colonists actively supported independence. Another third were loyalists, still devoted to the British crown, and the rest were neutral or just trying to keep their families safe. Many towns were torn apart by conflicting loyalties, and neighbors turned on each other. This wasn't some unified national uprising. It was messy, divided, and deeply personal. Another popular myth is that the Americans won the war because of their superior courage or military brilliance. Of course, there was plenty of bravery, but without help from France, the outcome could have been very different. France provided money, weapons, ships, and thousands of troops. Their naval blockade at Yorktown was crucial. The British couldn't escape, and that turned the tide. It wasn't just American grit that won the war, it was global geopolitics and foreign alliances too. Next, there's the idea that the tax on tea was the main reason for the revolution. Ironically, that tax actually made tea cheaper, but it came with strings attached. The colonists were less upset about the cost and more about what the tax represented. Parliament, making decisions for them without their input. It was about power and autonomy, not tea. In other words, it wasn't the price tag. It was the principle that lit the fuse. Then, there's the myth that after the Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4th, 1776, America instantly became a free country. Not quite. Most of the signers didn't even sign on July 4th. Some weren't present, others signed weeks or even months later. And independence wasn't secured for another 7 years. During that time, the war raged on, and the outcome remained uncertain. July 4th became symbolic, but real freedom was still a long, bloody fight away. Let's talk about George Washington. He's often portrayed as a military genius who outmaneuvered the British at every turn. In truth, Washington lost many battles, including major ones in New York, and made serious mistakes. But what set him apart wasn't flawless strategy. It was his resilience and leadership under pressure. He kept the army together through harsh winters, lack of supplies, and low morale. That ability to lead by example made him irreplaceable, not because he was perfect, but because he was steady. Another widespread myth is that enslaved people gained freedom after the Revolution. Sadly, for most African Americans, the ideals of liberty didn't apply. Slavery continued in the South untouched, and the new Constitution even protected it through clauses like the 3/5 Compromise. Some enslaved people joined the British side, promised freedom in return for service, but even then, many were betrayed or re-enslaved after the war. For Black Americans, the Revolution was more promise than reality. The Boston Tea Party is often remembered as a peaceful act of protest, brave patriots making a stand. But in truth, it was a calculated act of sabotage. The protesters, disguised as Native Americans, snuck onto ships at night and destroyed tons of property, the modern equivalent of millions of dollars. To the British, it was criminal vandalism, not noble resistance. And their harsh response, closing Boston's port and tightening control, pushed more colonists toward rebellion. But the Tea Party itself? It was anything but peaceful. Another myth, that the colonists were poor, oppressed farmers suffering under unbearable taxes. In fact, the colonies were among the most prosperous parts of the British Empire. Many colonists lived better than working-class people in England. The real spark wasn't poverty, but frustration among the colonial elite who felt excluded from power. Wealthy planters and merchants didn't want to be treated like second-class subjects. This revolution was led by the rich, not the desperate. We also tend to think the British were the villains, ruthless occupiers, while the Americans were noble defenders of freedom. But war is never that simple. Atrocities happened on both sides. Patriots tarred and feathered loyalists, seized property, and ran people out of town. British troops burned villages and executed prisoners. It was a war fought in backyards and town squares, not distant battlefields, and it was brutal, no matter which flag you flew. And finally, there's the idea that once the war ended, America became a full-fledged democracy. But the years after independence were full of instability. The Articles of Confederation created a weak national government, unable to collect taxes or maintain order. Shays' Rebellion in 1786 showed just how fragile the new republic really was. It wasn't until the Constitution was ratified in 1789 that a stronger government was formed. And even then, voting rights were limited to white male property owners in most states. It was a democracy in name, but only for a few. The American Revolution wasn't a simple story of freedom triumphing over tyranny. It was a complex, violent political struggle full of contradictions and hard truths. It gave birth to powerful ideals, liberty, representation, self-governance, but it also left many people behind. Understanding its real story means letting go of the myths and embracing the complexity. And maybe, just maybe, that's what real patriotism looks like. Not blind belief, but a willingness to face the past honestly.